All right, so in the wake of all of the brutality that we have seen demonstrated by police officers across the United States over the last couple of weeks and months and years, it seems like there is finally some buildup, some pressure for Congress to do something about it. And listen, I mean, we're going to get into a clip here from Cori Bush where she's giving her opinion on where the red line in the sand is going to be for her on some sort of policing or justice bill that could be brought forward. But if I'm going to be honest about it, okay, and we're going to talk more about this after the clip, we have Joe Biden as the president of the United States, Kamala Harris as the vice president of the United States. We have a Democratic Party that is deeply embedded with police, that defends the police instead of wanting to defund the police, along with a Republican Party that is totally irredeemable on this subject and really shouldn't be entertained in any serious way. So the expectations for a bill that would be brought forward to tackle policing in this country is basically, under the given circumstances, not going to be substantively addressing the problem with policing, but there are some wins and some concessions that we can get from this, specifically on things like qualified immunity, which is exactly what Cori Bush is doing, drawing her line in the sand on this issue. So let's go ahead and listen to what she had to say.
You know, right now we need to end qualified immunity, period. That's my stance. So
you are not
that
willing
is
to compromise on that?
So we compromise on so much, we compromise, we die. We compromise, we die. We compromise, we die. I didn't come to Congress to compromise on what could keep us alive, because it holds police officers specifically accountable. Because the thing is this: if you don't hurt people, if you don't kill people, if you are just and fair in your work, then do you need the qualified immunity anyway? So the thing is, all of this safety net. The safety net shouldn't be there. But let me say this: where are all of these special protections for nurses and for other people in other positions that do very dangerous work, that's just trying to help people? So no, I will not compromise on that. We need to end qualified immunity, and the reason why there is this open lane for compromise is because they see that people will do it. I didn't come. St. Louis did not send me here. St. Louis being number one for police murder in the country per capita, and has been that way for years. The people did not send me here to save their lives by falling down on the one thing that we needed the most. No.
And I don't want to belabor this, and I hear the passion in your voice on this issue, but if it comes back to the House with a compromise on qualified immunity, would you vote against that?
I am not prepared to vote. I am not prepared to support that.
Well, there you go. Okay, so let me just say first, I agree 100% with everything that Cori Bush just said. She's serving her constituents. I know it's a radical thing that we barely ever get to see from people who work in Washington, D.C. in our government, but she actually is legitimately working with her constituents and doing exactly what they wanted. She was somebody who came up to prominence in St. Louis, partially because she was an activist and organizer on the ground who was involved in some of these Black Lives Matter protests for months, and so she knows exactly what people are looking for on the ground, and she is doing exactly like she said. She's fighting the exact fight that they sent her there to go and fight for. And to a broader point, finally, I mean, at least it seems like this is the first or one of the first examples that I've seen from members of the squad where they are willing to do exactly what she just described, and that is draw a red line in the sand on some of these policies that are being put forward, or some of the legislation that is being put forward. Draw your red line in the sand up front before negotiations start, so that you have that point of leverage, and you say, well, I'm not going to support any of this legislation that you put forward unless it includes this, this, and this. And this exact threat of withholding your vote unless you get X, Y, and Z is exactly what has been getting Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and all of these other corrupt aspects of the Democratic Party, has been winning them concessions. So there's no reason why progressives couldn't do this equally in the opposite direction as people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have been doing. That's something that I've been advocating for weeks now. We've been trying to get progressives to draw red lines in the sand and actually come together and form a cohesive block of voting so that they can exercise this type of power and force some of the progressive items into this the legislation that is being brought forward. So the one difference here between this and previous examples that we have had, like for example on the coronavirus bill that Joe Biden put forward, the $1.9 trillion package, is this bill doesn't have the same amount of leverage. Why not? because one, the filibuster still exists, and this is not a bill that they are going to, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which is sort of what they're alluding to here, or any other bill that they put forward, it's not going to be passed through the process of budget reconciliation. So that means, unless you get rid of the filibuster, you're going to have to deal with 10 Republicans. And let me be honest, okay, and this is where I kind of get into being realistic about this. If you don't abolish the filibuster and you force yourself to negotiate with Republicans on this bill, it's not going to be anything substantive. I mean, we know exactly who the Republican Party is. They're not going to simply vote for something to reform the police if it's something substantive. Of course they're not. They're passing bills all around the country. Like Florida just passed a bill. The Republican Party in Florida just passed a bill that basically outlawed the ability for local municipalities to have the ability to defund their police. They straight up made it illegal. So, these are not things that the Republican Party is seriously willing to engage with. And the other point that I wanted to make, well, first of all, let me just read you real quick, just a quick rundown of exactly what qualified immunity is, just so you know exactly why this is so important. So qualified immunity is a special protection for government workers that the Supreme Court created in 1982 as an act of judicial policy making. The case did not actually involve police that established it, and it was brought forward by a whistleblower who wanted to sue Nixon White House for punishing him because he spoke out against the Pentagon's weapons program. So under qualified immunity, government workers can be held accountable for violating someone's rights if a court has previously ruled that it was clearly established those precise actions were unconstitutional, and if no such decision exists, or it exists but in another jurisdiction, the official is immune, even if the official intentionally, maliciously, or unreasonably violated the law or constitution. So what does that really mean? I mean, what that basically means is the police officers are by default immune to civil lawsuits against them, or lawsuits brought forward by, like, if you were police, you think police violated your constitutional rights and you wanted to sue them for that, under qualified immunity, you would not be able to do that unless there is a specific previous legal precedent involving the very specifics of the violation of your constitutional rights and the context in which it occurs. So they give a ridiculous example here, or a good example that explains the ridiculous nature of this. So here's just an example. To show that a right is clearly established, a victim must identify an earlier decision by the Supreme Court or a federal appeals court in the same jurisdiction holding that precisely the same conduct under the same circumstances is illegal or unconstitutional, and if no such decision exists, qualified immunity protects them by default. An example, the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals recently held that a prison guard who pepper sprayed an inmate locked in his cell for no reason did not violate a clearly established right, because similarly cited cases involved law enforcement officials who had hit and tased inmates for no reason. So do you see the stupid qualifications that they are giving here? Oh, so it's not a it's not a violation of my constitutional rights because they didn't specifically hit or tase me, as was specified by previous examples. So basically, unless the exact circumstance that you're talking about has happened before and has been established by a court, the officer is assumed innocent by default and cannot be charged through civil lawsuits. So that's basically what qualified immunity does. You can see where the problems exist with that. Obviously, people should be able to sue officers for violating their constitutional rights, period. But that's why qualified immunity is worth taking a stand on. So I'm glad that she's taking a stand on qualified immunity. But remember, we have to take this in context, okay? We're dealing with the Republican Party, we're dealing with the Democratic Party even, that are not seriously willing to address the underlying reasons for the police brutality and our broken criminal justice system here in this country. The actual first things that you would do if you really wanted to address criminal justice reform, number one, the biggest thing that could have the largest impact of anything else you could do, and would be relatively easy to do, is end the drug war. Okay, stop arresting people for petty drug crimes. Stop arresting people for non-violent drug offenses. Legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs across the board. Specifically, you can start with marijuana because that's the biggest one that is abused by police officers in order to justify locking people up for bullshit offenses. Legalize marijuana, end the drug war. That's the number one thing that you could do if you seriously wanted to address it. We have literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are sitting in prison right now, and not to mention the millions of police interactions that turn violent. just over bullshit. I mean, just over having a couple grams of marijuana on you. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we shouldn't be having a society that criminalizes something that is safer to use than even something like alcohol. I mean, it's not only a freedom issue, but again, it's a criminal justice issue. It's an issue with our policing as well. So really, as a way that I found to say it is, ending the drug war is the quickest way to defunding the police, because that's a substantial amount of the work that they're doing is criminalizing drug offenses. So that's something you could wipe across the board. The next thing, obviously, is defunding the police and reallocating those resources towards more effective community-oriented programs, whether it's community-oriented in law enforcement programs, or whether it's things like investing in healthcare, investing in education, investing in infrastructure, community programs, etc. Those are the things that you could do to substantively address the broken nature of our policing system. And I don't even know if it's fair to call it broken, because it's doing what it was intended to do from the beginning. Police do not serve communities. They were never intended to serve communities. They were always intended to protect and serve the capital interests of the capital ownership class. They protect and serve private property more so than they protect any individual human beings. And so they're really, it's a problem with the institution as a whole, more so than it's a problem with holding specific officers accountable, if that makes sense. And so these bills that are being brought forward, again, if you don't eliminate the filibuster, it's not going to be anything substantive, but it's a good lesson to learn here from Cori Bush. I'm glad they're finally willing to start drawing some lines in the sand, and I really wish that they would take that as a broader approach and start doing that on things like the $15 minimum wage or any of these other policy priorities that we want to see included in these packages.